Hey, Chicago, what do you say? It's the CHGO Cubs podcast presented by PointsBet. Use that promo code CHGO when you sign up to get 2 risk-free bets up to $2,000. Luke Stuckmeyer back off the IL. Ryan Herrera back from press box. Cody Delmendo, also a player to be named later in the Juan Soto trade coming up. Ooh. And our draft expert, Bryan Smith, in from Bleacher Nation at Cub Prospects on Twitter. We are going to do a mostly heavy draft podcast today. Cubs are wrapping up day 2 of this wild, fast and furious Major League Draft, and they have gone heavy on the arms. I didn't expect this. Brian, do you think this has to do with, we think they're going to be 8 out of 9 or 9 out of 10 pitchers?
Right. Does
this have to do with Carter Hawkins being a pitching guru a little bit, like having a pitching background, or does this have to do with just taking best player available, or is it something in between there?
Yeah, I think it's probably something in between. I think it's too much of a coincidence that there isn't some amount of strategy involved. I mean, you don't go 8 to 9 pitchers by total accident. I think if you were looking to balance it out, you easily could have done that at a certain point, and they definitely feel good about their pitching infrastructure. But I also think part of it probably, there is a certain level of coincidence that it wasn't, 6 pitchers and 3 hitters or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, Carter Hawkins is supposed to be the pitching whisperer. He knows how to develop pitchers. That's part of why he's here, right?
Yeah, and Craig Breslow has done an amazing job this year. I mean, I think, if you look under the hood metrics they have to measure minor leaguers, I've seen that the Cubs have the number 2 average stuff in their minor leaguers this year, and that's up from like 26th last year. So they've made a huge jump in that department, and I guess they are now putting their money where their mouth is and investing in the players to match the infrastructure.
Yeah, and that's like, we kind of talked about this whole narrative about the Cubs can't develop pitching or something like that, so they must have really good faith in like Craig Breslow and just what they're doing, that they're going out and spending so far 8 of their 9 first picks in the draft as pitchers.
I have to say, last night was like the first time I saw Cubs Twitter erupt in anger over the draft.
God. Right.
Like, I've never seen Cubs Twitter get angry over guys that we won't see for like 2 or 3 years, probably. I was like I was surprised. I was also like, oh, I can get into this. Like, we can yell and back and forth at each other about some guys that we all have never watched before if we really want to do that. But I don't know. It's kind of like what we all just kind of been talking about here. The pitching infrastructure was not great before,
right?
The last few years, and now the Cubs are really trying to fix that. I also don't blame people for being a little upset about not taking a position player, though, considering the guys that were there. But again, as someone that I don't watch those guys every day like a lot of the experts do. But to me, it's like we're at a point where I feel like we have to at least wait and see.
If I think back on the last maybe 5, 8, 10 Cubs drafts, I think the pick that got people the angriest on Twitter like last night was Nico Hoener. Nico was not somebody who was projected to be a top 50 pick. The Cubs took him in the first round, got him a little cheap, and that opened up the door to draft Brendan Davis a couple rounds later. And so I think, there's a little bit of that in play with the strategy they had with Cade Horton, which is going to allow them to sign a couple of those high school picks that we saw both last night in Jackson Ferris and then today in Naz Mule and the shortstop they took from California.
Ferris was ranked as high as number 19 for prospects, and, the Cubs get him at 47 overall. So like you said, maybe they figure to themselves, there's no guarantee he's going to be there at 47, but you could be looking at anybody in there and say to yourself, well, technically we could get 2 top 20 picks if we slot down in that first pick and then leave it open to come up in the second one. So, I mean, the way it looks is that they got 2 top 20 prospects in the draft.
Right.
With the 47th pick. That's not bad.
I think what people don't realize is these conversations are happening about dollar amounts as the draft is going. So, the Cubs, when they started to realize that they might go with an underslot player at 7, they were talking to high school pitchers, and they were probably, I think they said they had Ferris at the top of their board. I'm sure they told him, hey, $2.5–3 million is what you have coming. Like, you should not accept $1 less from anyone else. And so when other teams called him, he set his number, and that allowed him to drop. So there is a little bit of that game that gets played during the draft.
Yeah, obviously it's easier to get a college guy to sign because what are their options, other than the rare Jeff Samardzija deal where you're trying to convince somebody not to play football or another sport, Kyler Murray. But it is interesting to see the way that all works. I think everybody else, most of us look at the draft. We don't know any of the kids. Unless you saw Horton pitch at the College World Series, the odds of you having seen one of these guys pitch live is almost zero, right? Like if for the average fan, almost zero. You would have no idea who's really better, and you're just going by a ranking you see on a website, and if you don't see that guy or you don't know his famous dad, what are you going on? Like, I can't personally, again, if people want to be angry about the draft, go ahead. I just personally can't be. I don't know anything about any of them other than what I've read on a website. Yeah. And that's just being honest. I haven't seen any of these guys pitch.
Right.
Yeah, and that's when, I think people just take, mock drafts and rankings as gospel and stuff like that, when it's just, it's so much more of an intricate process than that. Like, you have no idea what's going on in the
the Rangers moved up and took Kumar Rocker.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That was the biggest shock of the draft. Like, he was in, the 30s of, prospect
and he's got injury history.
And then he gets picked number 3 overall by the Rangers. So it's
he's got a high ceiling, right?
I think people just, take way too much stock in what the experts are the experts for a reason, right? But just stuff happens when teams are considering their options and talking to players and all this different stuff. So it's I don't get the Cade Horton got so no one was happy about it for some reason. That's Cubs Twitter. No one's happy about anything, but I'm just dude, it's the draft, and there's our players that aren't going to see the big leagues for a couple of years at best. Just relax. These guys, none of these guys are coming up to impact the team for a couple of years anyway. It just didn't make any sense to me to see all that.
There's anything that I thought of with the moment that they took him was okay, at least he's a college pitcher, so it's not like he's a 18, 19-year-old kid or even younger than that that's going to take 5 years or something like that before we see him. If they get him in the pitch lab like they call it, and they do what they do and do what we've seen from these other guys, we could see him in 2-3 years, I guess. I mean, I don't know the timeline, but I'm just saying, that was the idea of me. The fact that Jim Callis said best college pitcher in the draft, and 2, that he was a college pitcher. So it's okay, perhaps he's on that timeline of when the Cubs theoretically think that they could be World Series ready. Who knows what his role on that future team could be. So
Bryan, he's Cade Horton, could have gone to Oklahoma. Turns 21. He's already had Tommy John surgery. Yep. And the biggest knock you'll see on Twitter is people saying, well, his ERA is nearly 5 in college. So tell us why you think the Cubs targeted this guy, and as they say, he was their best college pitcher on the board, and why they went after him.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty amazing story that he was a guy that had an ERA of 7, and during, I think, the month of May, he was playing with his slider. He had a teammate suggest a new slider grip, started messing with it in the outfield, then took it to the bullpen. Within 2 weeks, he's pitching in, Big 12 playoff, Big 12 championship games using that slider. Within 3 weeks of that, he's in the College World Series throwing more sliders than fastballs.
And he's striking out 20-something guys in 2 games, the Notre Dame and the Ole Miss one, right?
Yeah.
I know Kantrowitz said something along the lines of if you would have asked him 2 months ago, was Cade Horton going to be the first round draft pick for the Cubs? I mean, that's how quickly things change. 2 months ago, probably not. But after seeing him, kind of develop a slider, like you said, pitch very well in postseason play, big lights, all this kind of stuff, and that's kind of why he was kind of shooting up the draft board. I remember seeing just on Twitter, rumblings that Cade Horton could be sneaking to the top 10 and that kind of stuff. Not that anyone predicted number 7, but that he was there was the buzz was kind of starting to build around him more and more.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's changed, I think, with how players are evaluated these days, using those TrackMan and Rapsodo numbers that are under the hood. I think if you look at Cade Horton maybe 10, 15 years ago, you'd see that guy who came on late, but you'd have to weigh that against the performance you saw early in the season. You don't know if you're trusting if that slider is real. Now there's real data that, okay, this is a new pitch. This is thrown differently than his pitches in the past. And you can evaluate the stuff metrically instead of just using the scout's eye.
Well, I think it's impressive, too, that he just learned it and then he was dominating with it.
Yeah.
And if you're the Cubs and you think you have this infrastructure of pitching that you can get the guys in the lab and you can teach them to be the next Keegan Thompson, learn a pitch quickly. If somebody's showing the ability at a young age to adapt and learn to do something that quickly, that's an impressive trait. You're not just looking at ERA and wins and losses and stats that might not mean anything. This is a guy who was still returning from Tommy John surgery, learned a new pitch quickly, and then was dominating at the highest of that level that he was pitching at very soon after all of that happened. So maybe the Cubs are thinking, if he can learn that slider quickly, we can also adjust his changeup quickly,
right,
and he might be getting to the majors quickly. And also, again, this is not an exact science. The Major League Draft is full of first round, second round, third round, fourth round failures. Look at DJ Herrera, who's climbing up the Cubs prospect list. What is he, 8th rounder?
Yeah.
So don't think that the guy the Cubs are selecting 7th or 8th or maybe Mark McGwire's son in this draft couldn't end up being better than all the other guys they just took. That's just the way the baseball draft seems to roll out every single year. Am I wrong on that?
No, I mean, the baseball is just that sport, maybe with hockey where we know less about the draft picks than we do in other sports. It's not always the best player available that gets drafted, so it can be a little funky. And yeah, I mean, I think the 4th round pick, for example, is a guy who's going to get a lot of money, and I think if it was a best player available draft, probably would have been taken 2 rounds earlier.
I will say that the comparison, I assume it was Brett from the Bleacher Nation Twitter account last night, where he kind of used the NFL draft as a way to explain why the Cubs did what they did with the first 2 picks, as a way of like trading back. And for someone like me and maybe even the average fan in terms of the MLB draft, like it kind of made sense, because to go up and take Horton, but then still get the number 19 overall prospect at 47, which in one way you can look at it, how did the number 19 prospect fall all the way to 47? I don't know, but kind of like what you just said, it's not always the best player available.
Yep.
It's also like, again, like maybe there's just not enough information. I don't know. Maybe it's because he was a high school pitcher. The comparison between using the NFL draft and how the Cubs in a way like traded back, to me it like made a little bit more sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way. It was Brett that laid it out, and I think that is what they did. They traded back not just to get Jackson Ferris, but then they also had some money to do the things they did today. So it was trading back to get 15 and 20, but also then to kind of move up in the 3rd and 4th rounds a little higher than they would have otherwise been able to.
Well, I think when you look at Jackson Ferris, again, that's the pitcher they took from IMG Academy, 18 years old, 6'4", 195. I heard the comparison, and I love these comparisons because I know they're totally unfair.
Right.
But there isn't a fan out there that doesn't go, okay, who does he remind you of,
Right.
So the first one I heard for Jackson Ferris was, he reminds me a little bit of Clayton Kershaw. He's a little funky. Okay, if you got Clayton Kershaw with the 47th overall pick, like, you'll stop complaining about the draft.
Right.
Who does Horton remind you of?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote today in my piece at Bleacher Nation that I think the upside comparison that I see for him is Dylan Cease.
Oh,
Dylan is
that's what we were wondering yesterday when you tweeted that out.
Yeah, very similar height, similar build, pretty similar direct delivery. And when Cease took off with the White Sox, it was when he started throwing his slider just as much as his fastball. He throws 40% fastballs, even though he can throw at 97. Throws 40% sliders. They actually kind of break similar, so I do see that comparison. Do I think that Cade Horton will ever have a half of baseball like Dylan Cease just had? Probably not, but that's the fun in dreaming of it.
I mean, it's fun to watch just the different types. First of all, a team is always going to say, those were our top 2 guys on the board. That's who we were targeting all along, and we're thrilled nobody's ever going to come out and say, well, we were hoping another guy was going to slide to us, so we ended up with so-and-so. First of all, there's a clear focus on pitching. The one position player that they took in those early drafts, Christopher Pasiola from California, a shortstop, a high school kid. And I saw Niren on the chat. Can you show us the chat real quick? Well, Kevin, he was saying, would you trade? He's ready to trade these guys. Would you trade Jackson, Farrell, and Pasiola for Tucker Toman?
Listen, that's it. No, I would not. I think.
What about Juan Soto?
Yeah, they could have the team.
By the way,
we also have
Cubs just made their 10th round pick.
Okay.
293rd overall. Brody McCullough, something like that. A right-handed pitcher out of Wingate University.
9 out of 10 pitchers.
So you could tell what the Cubs were trying to do in this
it's
draft.
It's the anti-13-14 draft where they went strictly sluggers, right?
Yes.
It's like the total flip of what they did the first time around on the rebuild, where they saw a change in baseball and they were like, we need hitters, we hit hitters. Obviously, the game has clearly changed, and now they're doing the opposite. I don't know if that's the only reason or if they think
a lot of teams are doing it.
The White Sox were 4 out of 5 pitchers to start.
Whenever I saw the Giants took a guy where I went to school, they had at that point they had taken all pitchers, and that was the 6th round pick. So I mean, I don't know where they're at now, but I mean, basically the point is that a lot of teams are going heavy on the pitchers, and like I get it, man. Like to me, it's like the more I think about it, the Dodgers do a lot of that, right? Where they just have like this assembly line of young arms who just come up every year, 1 or 2 of them, and you're like, where did this guy come from? And like, so to me, again, it goes back to, those first 2 picks and whatever. Like, if the Cubs are trying to use the Dodgers like blueprint a little bit, like to me, that leaves me with some optimistic hope of. Hopefully you get them in the pitch lab and you can continue to do what you've done with some guys that we've already seen at the major league level, and we'll see what happens. I won't bank on all of them being serviceable, but like you obviously you hope those early ones do.
I think the Cubs strategy in 2013, 2014 was that you get hitters into the system, and because the success rate on hitters is going to be a little higher, and then you go out and you buy pitching, you trade for pitching. I think what's changed in baseball in the last 10 years is being able to get really good pitchers is not as easy as it used to be. I mean, Joe Musgrove today, for example, it came out that he's like getting closer to an extension with the Padres. That was a guy the Cubs might have targeted this offseason that's off the board. I think if you leave yourself saying, we need to go out and get an ace, that's going to be really hard to do. So you gotta develop that one internally, and then you can go get the other things.
I think pitchers are also way more likely to be injured, so you better stockpile them. That's something we've learned, obviously, again, from this Cubs team going into it. Not enough depth. You say, well, they may have enough pitchers,
Cody
and then
Hoyer,
pretty much you go the whole rotation through has had something, almost. Stroman was hurt, Hendricks was hurt, Miley was hurt, Smiley was hurt. Mills was hurt to start the season.
Ethan Roberts.
I wonder if universal DH and getting rid of the shift has impacted teams thinking on hitters or pitchers as well, because the game is going to change that way too, we believe, in the future. And how will that impact future drafts? I don't know the answer to that, but I wonder if that's another little sidebar story to what seems to be happening around the draft this year. Yeah. Any thoughts on that? I mean, you think that's possible, that universal DH and the shift could impact that?
I do, yeah. I mean, I think that teams know that there's going to be a pushback against the success that pitchers are having, and whether it's Theo Epstein's talked about moving the mound back, things like that, and I think that teams now realize that the more stuff you can have in the system, and you look at these Cubs picks, they drafted a lot of guys that can throw 96 to 99 miles an hour, and it's kind of like an old adage, but it's true. Throwing harder is better. Teams believe that now probably more than they did when it was just Texas flamethrowers getting drafted in the first round 40 years ago. So I think it is about just stockpiling arms.
And also you look at specifically the first 2 guys, you say throwing 96, 97, like guys throwing mid to upper 90s, but they also seem to have now breaking balls that go with that, which is like, it's not just a guy throwing 98 straight down the middle, because that doesn't play anymore in Major League Baseball. There's too many guys that can do it, and too many hitters that can turn it around the other direction. But when you throw in a slider that's 90, 91, and you mix it up with that, now you have a dangerous combination for a pitcher. And so I think it's just fascinating to see the way the game evolves just in 4 or 5 year periods, how much it can change for what teams are looking for. And we know that the Cubs are always trying to be on the cutting edge of being one step ahead.
Right.
You know, and maybe before they were spending money internationally, the rules changed. They couldn't just go out and outspend everybody internationally. Now you're looking at slot and trying to figure out how can you move up and get your best value, which might not necessarily be in straight order the 10 best players, but they might be the 10 best that you can afford to fit into. It's just like a fantasy draft.
Yeah.
If you do the fantasy draft where you have amount of money to spend, you can't just take the 10 best players.
Right.
You got to be able to pay them and fit them into a slot. So I think it'll be fun to watch.
We had a super chat up there. We haven't read it yet. If you want to bring that up, Kevin. Sorry to the person that we took so long. From
I was rambling on.
Gerard
Thomas.
Gerard. Yeah, my bad. He says, loving the great perspectives of real Cubs fans. So
This is so nice to get a nice comment.
yeah,
in
it's
the chat.
nice to get nice comments.
Look at
We gotta
Michael
mix-
Collada right above him, like two above him.
We got to mix Gerard and Michael in there. You know, you got to get a good mixture.
Balance. A balance.
Balance is key to a healthy life.
I like RW with the question. He's a guy that calls me Steve occasionally. He says Nazir Mule is a two-way player, shortstop and a pitcher. Do you think the Cubs would let him be a two-way player for just a little bit? That's interesting because obviously you've seen Ohtani thrive in that role, and even their first-round pick has played position player and pitcher and stud high school quarterback. Do you think that's possible that the Cubs would entertain letting somebody do something like that?
Yeah, that was debated a little bit on Twitter this afternoon, and because Mule has come out and said that he wants to play both ways as a pro, and if you're going to sign him, you know, to a certain extent, maybe you do have to listen to him. It is probably noteworthy the Cubs announced him only as a pitcher, and I can say personally, like, when I watch his swing, I'm not really a fan of it. If it was me, I would be trying to convince him to only pitch, especially because then you can sort of change your body. You can, you know, add a lot more to your hips and thighs and things like that are only going to help sustain velocity. So I hope that they go pitcher only. I know it's fun to have the idea of a two-way player, but, you know, those are really, really long odds. So my vote is just pitcher.
We
There's
just
also-
develop our own Ohtani, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, thought process.
There's also a lot of guys, Wilson Contreras, many guys who have tried one thing, it doesn't work out, you switch their position.
fair.
You know, Brandon Hughes is a guy,
Brandon
right?
Hughes was an outfielder that was about to get cut, and then 3 years ago turned into a pitcher, and now
He's going to be probably one of the best arms in the pen going
Oh,
next
you can't
year.
say that, Cody. You jinx everything.
I don't jinx everything.
lot
I
of
wasn't
things.
wrong about Nico Hoener, was I?
That's fair. The one time he was right.
By the way, we will go over our preseason
I said one
predictions.
of, by the way, not the. So
We will go over our preseason predictions on Thursday's podcast and take a look at how crazy some of them were and how really spot on some of them were. And really, we have a mixture of both. We're talking to Bryan Smith of Bleacher Nation at Cub Prospects on Twitter, talking about the Cubs draft. Let's go down to the bottom of the draft towards the end of the day. Who doesn't love drafting Mark McGwire's kid, and he's going to be forced to wear Cubby blue? Are we calling him Little Mac? Are we calling him Junior Bacon Cheeseburger? Baby Big Mac? And he's a pitcher on top of it. Now, two of his sons have been drafted, right?
Yep.
Both sons.
Yeah.
This is the youngest. If you look at Mark McGwire's Hall of Fame induction picture, this is the little boy with, I think, braces in the photo, now a Cubs prospect and a pitcher. Do you think, I mean, it's not too often the son turns out to be as great as his dad.
Right.
What do you know about him? Can you tell us anything about Mark McGwire's son?
Well, I'll point out that Mark McGwire was a pitcher. Mark McGwire was a college pitcher at USC. You know, went to the Alaska Summer League and hit like hell, and then became a first baseman after that. So, you know, he knows pitching. He knows how to teach pitching. So, you know, I would trust those bloodlines even on the pitching side. But
Are you telling us to trust Mark McGwire?
Right.
I can't go
exactly.
that far.
Well, I mean, the funny thing about Mason, too, is that it looks to me like he needs to put on a little weight. But if I'm the Cubs, I'm pretty confident that a McGwire knows how to do that, even later in his career. So.
That's good.
Little Yumper with another super chat, $5. Sorry if you guys touched on this with the Juan Soto rumors. Should the Cubs be considering trading some of their farm system capital for generational talent?
Yes.
And
Yes.
that has hit Twitter and gone, even more so with the draft coming up. And I've seen some people say, even if you traded Brennan Davis and Caleb Killian and DJ Hers
and
and
PCA,
Nico Hoener and PCA, it still wouldn't be enough to get Soto. I want to hear what you guys think. My initial response is, why would you undo everything that you've just done to rebuild the farm system just for one player when Mike Trout can't help the Angels win by himself? I understand he's a great player. One player doesn't win baseball games.
Yeah, but I'm going to say Juan Soto is still age-wise, if you really want, these guys that you might bring up that might be something, Juan Soto's still 23. He's still their age, and he's already an MVP caliber player.
And you're getting him $500 million.
Give it to him. That's where baseball's
Doesn't seem like
going.
that's the trend the Cubs go with.
I think you get halfway into that contract, and that seems like he only got $500 million. That's crazy to think that, but 7-8 years from now, when players are going to be getting a lot more money 7-8 years from now for a full contract like that.
Little spin zone, the fact that now everyone knows that the Nationals are going to try and move this guy if they can't come to a deal. Doesn't that kind of take his value away in terms of what they can get back?
Interesting point, yeah.
I don't know. I'm just saying, I know 3 years of control and you got to give up a lot, but again, I just don't think any team is going to give up that many high-end prospects at this in this era that we're living in right now of baseball. I don't think. Yeah. I think I want the Cubs to give I'd give away Brennan Davis and PCA and whoever else that we got to get Juan Soto, but I also would understand if the Cubs didn't, just because of the gigantic ask. I mean, it's not just the prospects, it's the ticket price that comes with it. There's a huge sticker shock when you see $500 million. And it was his agent that likely put out the info. And even though there's 3 more years of control, it's if he's saying no to $440 million, how much do you have to pay this guy? Unless you get an automatic contract extension for however long.
Well, that's the thing. It's all contingent
if you
on
do
him,
that in part of the trade,
extension.
you know what I mean? But again, I would trade almost any, or not even almost, but any piece in the Cubs system to get Juan Soto.
Give him top 30 on pipeline. Give it to him.
There has to be a line somewhere, and that's why I brought up with the public knowing now that the Nationals want to move him, doesn't that have to diminish some of that value of getting the true value of him?
I think the thing that I haven't heard people talk about is the Scott Boras influence, and
it's fair.
I think if we look at the NBA, for example, when a top 10, top 15 player gets traded, what doesn't happen is the team says, we're going to trade him anywhere and we're going to just take the best return. No, what happens in the NBA? The player picks his team and then those two teams work the deal out. I'm pretty sure that when Juan Soto gets traded, he will be traded to a place that he and Scott Boras have already decided is where he wants to be for the long term. So, the Cubs might not even be available if Soto and Boras don't want him to be here. So I don't think it's a thing where we can just look at all the teams and say who has the best farm system, who has the best players to trade. It's going to be a place that he picks.
Lil Yumper says, thing is, he's 23 and he's a player you can literally build around. Don't argue against that. I'm just saying, what money are you going to have left? What prospects are you going to have left to build around him? Cody, what kind of bets are you making with the All-Star week here?
Well, we got the Derby tonight, and, I'm riding our old friend Kyle Schwarber. And tonight in the Derby, you get +3. I think it's plus 300 on
He's
points
going to
bet.
avenge getting cheated out of it in 18.
Yeah, totally got screwed.
Revenge Derby, yeah. I also like Julio Rodriguez as a long shot, +850 on points bet. No one's ever won it 3 times, so I don't want to take Alonso for that reason alone, but also he's not a bad bet either. So, anyway, on PointsBet. Like I'd say every show, it's my favorite app. I love to open it up every morning and look at all the lines. It's also the best way to support CHGO. And if you download that PointsBet app and use code CHGO, when you sign up, you get 2 risk-free bets up to $2,000. But that's not it. If you make a $50 or more first-time deposit, you get a free CHGO membership, which unlocks all of our web content. You even get a free shirt of your choice from the CHGO locker. That's $2,000 in free bets, a free CHGO membership, and a free T-shirt from the CHGO locker, all for making more than a $50 first-time deposit at PointsBet. If you have any questions, you can email pointsbet@allchgo.com, and we'll help you out. You're home for live in-play betting. Just got even better. See an edge in the game you're watching. Is your favorite team primed for a comeback? Anyone live bet the Cubs yesterday? Hope not. Probably would have given you a big, giant headache, even though they did come back to win. Don't just watch the game. Bet along with it live. More live betting, more live markets, and faster live cash outs. Follow along with your bets the moment they hit and stay in the live action all game long. Download the PointsBet app right now. Use promo code CHGO. So what are you waiting for? It's time to elevate your live betting game. Once the game starts, don't just bet. Live your bet life with PointsBet. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-800-GAMBLER for crisis counseling and referral services.
Got to tell you guys about Owen, which is only what you need. Owen's a 100% plant-based protein shake that gives you nutrition working as hard as you do. All their products are free of artificial ingredients, allergen-friendly, no gluten, no dairy, easily digestible. I started taking it when I heard Justin Fields was taking it, and he was on this plant-based diet. And I thought, how can I counteract the cookies, donuts, and cake that I eat every day? I thought, well, maybe this protein thing, Owen, doesn't work for me quite like it does Justin Fields, admittedly, but it's still good for me.
You're only just getting on it.
That's right. I'm just getting started. And Owen and CHGO have partnered up to give you an awesome offer, 20% off your first purchase at liveowen.com. That's liveowyn.com with the code CHGO20. Join me and Justin Fields. Try Owen, only what you need. The cookies and cream is delicious, and it's good for you, too. Where's my guy? Collada. He's always the biggest Ricketts hater. He said, guys, you got to be careful. Ricketts just choked on his dinner. He said, ha,
ha, ha, Ricketts signed Soto?
Yeah. I'm just kind of curious, like, if you had to put a package together for Juan Soto, like, if someone came to you and said, hey, like, what would you trade to get Juan Soto on the Cubs? What
would you trade, or what would the Nationals accept from you?
How high would you go before, like?
Yeah, what would be your top?
Even if the Nationals like we want more,
over under
more, like
Bryan Smith of Bleacher Nation joining us
from Bryan Smith, yeah, Bryan Smith's own GM cap.
Yeah, I mean, I would go really, really high. I mean, yeah, 4.5 prospects. I think depending, would I go the top 5 prospects? Probably, if I knew that I was signing him to a 12-year deal, I would think about doing it. I mean, it's a little steep, but I don't know. When you get to the point of, at that point, you've already negotiated an extension. You already know that he's going to be around. Are you really going to haggle between should I trade the 5th prospect or the 8th prospect or the 4th? Or the, if they can get him to sign and they believe that signing him is part of the process to rebuild another World Series team, I would not have a problem trading the top 4 prospects in the system.
I think you also have to like build that around like Ian Happ or Nico Hoener. Like one of those.
I was
going to
say they're not going to take all prospects. They're going to want your best young major league proven player as well, or 2.
And I also think like we kind of talked about how Soto's already that prospect that work out. And he's only 23. Like a few years ago, Miguel Amaya and Braylon Marquez were top 3 prospects, and they still like. Braylon Marquez pitched once in the majors, right? But like really, neither of them have really made it to the majors yet. So if you're counting on guys like in the top 5 who aren't in the majors yet, when you could go out and get Juan Soto for him, like I think that's a deal you have to take if it doesn't just completely bankrupt the farm. Like that's one thing that when you sell the entire farm, then that makes it tougher. But if you like usually there's probably a level the Cubs would go to and that everyone else would go to. The Nationals are probably going to want more, and it's not going to reach it. It's going to bankrupt, and that's a deal you probably shouldn't make.
Cody's laughing at Scott Crawford's comment. Is that who it is you're laughing at?
Ortega and Hayward for Soto. It would hurt, but for the team, I would do it. Yeah, same. You'd throw in Andrelton Simmons, too.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so RWB goes as far as this. Kevin Alcantara, Owen Casey, Brandon Davis, Madrigal, Jensen, DJ Hurst, Nelson Velasquez, Canario, Preciado. And I'm going to say, again, I don't think they'd even take that deal. They're going to want your best. They don't want guys that aren't proven at the major league level. They're going to want your best
Horner,
ones. But
Steele, Thompson.
They're going to want all three of those guys and maybe Seiya Suzuki too, and then your three best prospects.
And, I mean, at that point, the Cubs are already pretty darn far away from the World Series. Once you start taking away the better things they have at the major league level, at that point, then you're too far away from the World Series for something like that to be worth it. So it's a weird game where, at the end of the day, I doubt the Cubs are the pick. Mostly, as I said earlier, I don't think Juan Soto looks at Chicago Cubs, maybe losing 100 games this year and says, I want to be there. I bet he finds his way to a contender that will also meet that price tag.
Just watch it be the Dodgers.
It's just going to be such a huge
Dodgers,
price tag to meet. Like it's like thinking about what I think the Athletic put together a really kind of asked beat writers of teams that actually could legitimately have a shot at making a trade like that, and just the price tag that they were putting on it was so steep, and they're most of them were I don't even know if the Nationals would take that. That's how big it was. And I know Sahad have put together I think Nico was in there, Justin Steele, for the top a bunch of the top prospects, and it was even that seems like it's not going to be enough. But
I think at the end of the day, the Nationals are going to figure out a way to move or find a way to sign him. They're just going to have to go up to that $500 million mark. I think at the end of the day,
I don't know if they will.
It could all simply be negotiating by Boris just to throw that out there and bring him back to the table. And just remember, I have nothing against Juan Soto. He could be the best player in baseball for a long time. It's not the NBA. It's not like having LeBron James or whoever you might think. It's not 5 players. You need a full staff of players to get it done in Major League Baseball because the guy can only come up 4 times a game.
Right.
You can't win if he only bats 4 times. That's not going to do the rest of it.
If they're really going to trade him, they need to trade him, honestly, soon, because when I think about these other generational players who have these gigantic contracts now, Mookie Betts comes to mind, and that trade. I mean, Alex Verdugo's okay, but I know the Red Sox won the World Series the year before, but I don't. You think if they didn't want to pay him, they could have moved him and got just a similar type of value, right? That's how good of a baseball player he is. And now, the Dodgers are going to pay him all the money. That don't get me started, but that's kind of if they don't move him, then you better get that deal done sooner rather than later, or else the amount of prospects or the amount of value you get back is just not going to be as good as it is right now. As it would, it won't be as good in 3 years as it is now, because going into free agency. So, but I just, with Boris, they never sign contract extensions, man.
Right.
So we know all about that.
Yeah.
So.
Brian, I got a question for you. So let's say we get through this, what is going to be an awful end of the month, early start of August for the Cubs organization, depending on who you are. And they do trade Wilson and maybe Happ and a whole list of relievers, Robertson, all those guys. Where is the Cubs, in your eyes, where's the Cubs farm system now? Whereas, 13 and 14 after they went through it, they vaulted to almost the top of baseball or the top of baseball.
Right.
After this trade deadline, where do you expect the Cubs farm system to rank? How high up do you think they could go after this next group of trades happens?
Yeah, I don't think they're probably going to crack a top 3, because to be a top 3 farm system, you really need to have top 20 prospects, at least one top 20 prospect. Cubs are probably outside that. I think they could absolutely, and I think to a certain extent they probably already are, somewhere in that 4 to 8 range in terms of farm system. And yeah, I think that's probably as high as they get this year. The problem is, a lot of that farm system's far away, so you're not going to trade those guys, and then in September you're going to start to see these top prospects come up. It's probably another year before a lot of the guys are starting to hit. So the prospects we're going to see in August and September in Chicago are going to be a lot of guys that are sort of fringe 40-man guys that they're trying to figure out, is this a guy we keep? Is this a guy we leave exposed to the Rule 5 draft? So it's not – I don't think the major league prospects that come up in August and September are going to give a lot of hope that the farm system looks good. People are still going to have doubts, but in a year, I think people are going to see that there's real depth there.
What about DJ Herrera and Jordan Wicks got promoted to AA over the weekend, and I remember last year when Wicks got drafted, there was a lot of talk that he could be a quick one, and with them both being a AA now, I mean, what surprises me the most is Herrera's getting there.
Yeah.
Like, where do you project him as far as next year for both of them, if Herrera can even get up to the major league team next year? I feel pretty good about Wicks at least, but what about Herrera too?
Yeah, I feel similarly to you. I would say that I think Wicks could start games in Chicago next year. I think if Herrera's made the majors, and that feels to me probably a year early, it's probably more in that sort of Justin Steele initial role where you're building him in through 1 and 2 inning outings. But I think he's a guy that's like born to succeed in that role. So I think it might be a similar thing that we had with Steele, where he has a ton of success as a reliever, and then you start to say, I don't know, should we just keep him in this role? And then the determination, is he a reliever or a starter, will probably be somewhat determined by the major league team's success. If they're having success, you keep them in the bullpen. If they're not, then you go back, let them try starting, and see what you have.
Well, it's also similar to what with Keegan this year. Last year he was really good as a reliever. Little rocky run as a starter last year. I think he had a really good end of the year, like last game of the year. Came up, was like an elite reliever this year. Like started off this year elite relieving. Then me and Luke kind of were on the side of keep him here for a while, and then obviously that didn't happen with all the rotation injuries.
Good thing we're not in charge.
Becomes a starter. Has had some tough outings as a starter, which you expect as a guy who's still kind of trying to find his footing there. But I think he's already proven, like, at worst, he's going to be a really good multi-inning guy.
Yep.
And then that's when you can start. You give him this extended run as a starter. It doesn't work out. He's a really, really good bullpen arm if that's where he ends up. And he proved that for, like, the first 2 months of the year this year. And he was really good in that role last year, too. So I think if you talk about Herrera or whoever, like, that is something that I could see the Cubs kind of keeping on doing as far as giving these guys a little bit of run, maybe even if it's early as a bullpen guy. You're not going to throw him in as a starter, but you do something. You see what you got there as far as if they can be a bullpen guy, and then you start building on that starting role. I think that's what they did with Steele, what they did with Keegan, and what they're going to do. I can see that being very often what they do moving forward.
I totally agree.
Herrera, Wicks, Steele, Thompson, Jensen, whoever. Go through the list of young Cubs pitchers that they have. Do they have someone that stands out to you as a better shot at being a number one someday, or are they still going to be looking to find that repertoire in a guy that's number one? Or do they have a lot of guys that slot in 2, 3 that could be really, really good, or really effective closers, or really effective bullpen guys? I know fans look at those lists and they say, well, it's depth, but do they have what the Nationals are basically looking for? Somebody that's this surefire number one starter at the major league level. Killian, whoever those guys might be, who stands out as the one that would have the best shot at doing that?
What's funny is I think that the guy that stands out as the best shot at being a number one is Cade Horton.
Really?
I don't, and I'm not saying that I think that that's likely, but I'm saying that the other guys you mentioned to me probably don't have that high-end ceiling. And sometimes that's what you have is when a player's new, when a player's fresh, you see, like, with rose-colored glasses, the highest possible outcome. And then the more time you spend with them, you get that prospect fatigue, and it starts to say, maybe he's just a 3 or something. But I think that, I don't see that in Jordan Wicks. I think DJ probably doesn't have, he's probably not a guy that's going to pitch 6-7 innings, so I don't really see it there. Killian, you could probably talk me into it, but confidence is a little low in that department right now. I would say that Cade Horton has at least the fastball slider combo that gets you started in that conversation, and then it's up to the Cubs to build it from there.
That's another question I wanted to ask, like with Killian, since he's gone back down, like we keep seeing that, like he's the control issues and walking a few more guys. Like, what have you seen? Obviously, you watch all the games, and we don't watch all the games. But just what have you seen in his starts? Like, what is kind of the issue there? As an onlooker. The
interesting thing is his stuff is probably as good as it's ever been right now in a raw stuff department. He's been up to 98 in recent starts. The the cutter's been really good. The curveball's been really good. I think a recent start, he looked amazing for 2 innings. I was starting to get all these things on Twitter, like, is Killian back? Is Killian back? 3rd inning, he walks like 4 guys, and I get like 1,000 messages like, Killian sucks. I think what's happening is there's something off from a mechanical or release point standpoint. And probably at some point I would expect the Cubs to put him on the development list, maybe send him back to Arizona, get him in the pitch lab, and really try to like see on video what is the difference between, even this spring, he would have been in the pitch lab this spring. So they have video then, they have video probably right after they traded for him, and they can get real technical with the tiniest details about what's wrong. Yeah. And I'm guessing they're going to find it. There's a lot of smart guys that are doing pitching development for the Cubs right now.
And that's surprising because a guy, especially like as old as him, at AAA level, has already had you don't usually see that often. Someone going back out to Arizona at his level.
Yeah, and I mean this is a guy that walked like 12 people with the Giants last year, so it's very strange. Yeah. But the development list is a new thing that came into baseball last year. And I think it's a great thing, that a way to give pitchers a little breather from game action, but to continue their development in a different way.
Just really work on it.
Admittedly, that kind of discourages me because I was hoping maybe he'd come back up after the deadline.
Yeah.
And would just,
For sure.
Because, the wins and losses don't matter. You just, to me, just give me something to feel good about going into next year regarding him. And even right now, there's still some good. Obviously, as the stuff, it's just the command has been a struggle, but also that was the one thing everyone said that he was really good at. So right. Yeah, I'm with you. I don't understand that issue, but for the Cubs, it's not really the Cubs' sake, but they are in a position where they can take more time on him. They were in a winning window right now, they would not be doing that.
Right.
So, again, I'm a little discouraged about that, but
I also think if he puts together 2 really good starts in AAA, he's on the 40-man roster. I think in the second half of August and September, if he's pitching well, the Cubs will bring him back up, and they will test that confidence to say, hey, it's not different in the majors. You can throw your pitches in your spots. You have good enough stuff. Sort of, if they think it's a mental hurdle, I do think they will challenge him in Chicago and say, hey, let's get through this hurdle, especially with a 90-loss team that I think in September won't be really wearing it if they have losses and bad starts.
I want to hear your thoughts on Nieren's comment. Can you bring that up, Kevin? In 2024, or was it? Yeah. If 2024 Cubs has Wicks, Horton, Killian, Steele in the rotation, we probably lose 95 games.
Yeah, I mean, I think prospect outlets love to do, the 2025 team, 2026 team, and they do all the best prospect at each position. It never works out that way. I think any projected rotation you're going to have of Cubs players where every one of them is, homegrown and from the minors, that's just not how it works. So to a certain extent, that's probably true because a couple of those guys probably won't work out. But I don't know. Right now, I like it, and isn't it more fun to dream that the 2024 Cubs could be good with that rotation than to just already be cynical and say that's a 95-loss team?
Not in this chat, man.
Right. You still have to make room for Braylon Marquez and Adbert Alzolay. So
right.
Please make room for everybody.
And he also didn't mention Keegan Thompson, who's been the best Cubs pitcher this year.
Oh, Niren probably thinks that they're going to trade Keegan Thompson.
Well, it's the Soto deal.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, yeah, Soto deal.
Okay. Just kidding here. Just messing with you, Niren.
If you enjoy CHGO, one way to help us continue to grow, download that PointsBet app. Use the code CHGO when you sign up. 2 risk-free bets up to $2,000. But if you make a 50 or more first-time deposit, you get that free CHGO membership. Unlocks all of Ryan's web content, Jared Willis as well, and you even get a free shirt of your choice from the CHGO locker. Any questions, email pointsbet@allchgo.com, and we will help you out. In case you missed it, online sign-up available in Illinois right now. Download the PointsBet app. Register your account start to finish, all from your phone. You're signing up with the fastest sportsbook. It's easier than ever. So what are you waiting for? Once the game starts, don't just bet. Live your bet life with PointsBet. Gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700. I think the prospect thing has become fascinating for the Cubs because the major league team has become troublesome, to say the least. And you said a 90-loss team. I thought to myself, well, that's positive thinking right there. That's what we've been looking for, 90-loss team.
Right.
We're trying to keep them off the 100
We're on the race
list.
for 63.
Yeah, the
this
race
is probably
to
where
63.
you thrive when the major league team is just bad and everyone's coming to you to like, hey, what do we have to look forward to?
But I have a quarter of a pack of season tickets. I'm at Wrigley 20 games a year, and I would take a good team in a bad farm system any day.
Do we want to do mailbag a little bit here?
Yeah, you got some?
Yeah, we got some
let's
people
get some
who
mailbag
replied to our
questions.
tweet over on CHGO_Cubs on Twitter. Luke, you mentioned Braylon Marquez right before the ad, right? And this guy, Taryn, he's at Taryn Backup. He says, can Braylon still be a frontline starter for the Cubs? I guess more of the question is, what's the update on him? Because we haven't heard anything about him since spring training.
Yeah, no, I'm hoping Ryan can give the update here because
He had COVID.
I didn't know if maybe you had heard anything through the vines or anything like that.
No, I mean, there have been a few, like, the people that go to the backfields in Arizona have said that they've seen him a couple times here and there. I don't know if he's actively throwing right now. I would say, to answer the question, would have to do a whole lot of work in that sentence. A lot can happen. I think hoping that Braylon Marquez is a starting pitcher for the Cubs is probably misguided at this point. I think, could he be a reliever for the Cubs? Probably. But we are talking about a guy who, after this year, is only going to have 2 option seasons left. And he has not pitched now in, mostly in 3 years. So I think, being more realistic that the upside is probably a reliever, or, maybe the fit is in a different organization, honestly.
You say homegrown guys you can't fill the whole roster with those guys. Didn't he have some of the best, like, of all the guys we just talked about? I said, hey, who's your number one and coming out of this list? Was his stuff as good as any of those guys?
Yeah,
before all of this happened?
Yes, he had a run in the second half of the 2019 season. I remember that, July and August, which was about as good as a Cubs pitching prospect has had. He was, up to 101 miles an hour. He was in South Bend and then went to High A as well. And it was phenomenal. And I think hopes were justified at that point. Even like if you looked at his slider and changeup, people weren't even that high at it at the time. In 2020, he came up, had that one appearance in the majors. And if you look at the metrics behind the slider and changeup, they were really good too. So he was a really legitimate, good pitching prospect. And the fact that he failed, doesn't mean that it was incorrect that he wasn't a good pitching prospect. It's just that stuff happens, that's part of the game here.
I think honestly, we just don't really know what's going on. Last year was an injury, and then this year, Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, showed up to spring training late, and the whole COVID stuff, and we just haven't really got an update since. And that's based off my memory, so correct me if I'm wrong.
Sometimes when Jed Hoyer makes an appearance, you'll get at. It's mostly like. He's still kind of working through his progression. I know one of the photographers that's down in Arizona tweeted out him throwing, and everyone's like, "Oh, he looks slimmer, whatever." He did come late to spring training because of COVID for the second time. Just not a whole lot of not like a timeline of when he's gonna start throwing again or any of that kind of stuff. It's just kind of he's still trying to get him up. I don't remember exactly when Jed said it, but I think he talked about Marquez getting him off the mound wasn't imminent, or wasn't they didn't know exactly when they could start getting him off the mound. I'll try to find the quote and see when that was, but it's just kind of a bunch of those we're still working him back, no timeline, that kind of thing. That's what we're getting from that kind of stuff right now.
Okay, so the next question, and this I guess this is a little bit more related to the major league team as well as the draft. But broadcaster Nick on Twitter, he asked, with Contreras' trade imminent, why didn't the Cubs draft a catching prospect? Amaya's still a question mark. I think he's just talking overall. Yeah. There's still 10 rounds left, right? So it could happen. But I do know Amaya's supposed to be sent to Double-A soon, right? I think that was something I saw recently.
Yes. Yeah, I think Kevin Parada was that guy that's, I think when he was available at the Cub selection, there were probably so many Cub fans that were thinking, perfect, you get the best catcher in the draft that falls to you at 7, just as you're losing your all-star catcher. That's just not how teams draft. Teams don't draft for need. I guarantee in the draft room, Wilson Contreras did not come up one time. Like, that is not, you're not putting those two things together in the room. So I guess the answer to why didn't they draft a catcher is simply, they didn't love a catcher at any choice versus the pitcher that they inevitably drafted instead.
Admittedly, I probably wouldn't have liked them taking a catcher with their first-round pick either.
Yeah.
And again, it may have impacted slot money, like where you have money to spend for those later drafts. Like if he came in right where you take him, then maybe you don't get Ferris with your second pick. So it's just it's a mixing bowl of what you're trying to do. It's not as straightforward as the best player on there necessarily either.
By the way, so on May 19th, Jed said, kind of asked about an update on Braylon Marquez. He said, I'm not sure on games. He's throwing. We're trying to get him off a mound and get him back to pitching in games, but that's not imminent right now. So, yeah, so it's like that. That was 2 months ago. We haven't really gotten much update from him. He hasn't pitched, he hasn't pitched in a game yet,
Right.
2 months later. I wonder if maybe they're just kind of, because he's still young, trying to make sure like the arm issues that plagued him all last year, shoulder issues I think it was, just kind of is gone. Maybe that's why they're playing it slow right now. But that is kind of something that we're like, this guy was I think he was the top prospect a couple years ago, depending what site you were looking at.
Well, it had gone in the top 100 in all of baseball at one point.
I mean,
right?
Depending where you're looking at, like he was the Cubs' #1 prospect, and now there's not a lot of word about him, so that's definitely.
My guess would be he's brought back as a reliever. I mean, you're going to run into innings limits anyway if you do it otherwise. So I think when we think about him, we should probably think about him as a left-handed relief prospect.
I guess another one here. This comes from Alex_Clendenin. I think I think that's RWB team here on the YouTube chat.
Oh, you mean Steve?
Yeah, the guy who called you Steve.
I'm kidding.
I guess
We
we
love
can
him.
relate this to prospects too. But what are some trade packages that the Cubs could possibly get for Contreras, David Robertson, Ian Happ, and the rest of the guys that could be traded? I guess the question would be, is there any prospects out there that you have, with the particular teams that you think the Cubs could be talking with? Is there one out there that stands out that they could get back for Contreras?
I think what I learned from the Yu Darvish trade is like the baseball trades have changed a lot. And, I think when we first heard Yu Darvish was getting traded to the Padres, every Cubs fan brought up the Padres top prospect list and they said, we either this guy or this guy, one or two on their list, we'll get him. And then the trade happened and they didn't get anybody that was top 6 or 7 in the system.
Yeah.
Teams are less and less willing to trade top 100 prospects than ever. So if I had to guess what Wilson gets, I would guess it's a quantity package similar to Darvish more than getting a guy that we could pick right now as a top 100 guy.
And I think you also look at, sorry, Cody, but just the trades that Jed did make and the front office did make, a lot of those guys were kind of not wild cards, but it was also more under the radar kind of guys that they noticed and these guys we could help develop. And most of them have really hit, gone to another level this year. PCA obviously chief among them, which is a lot of people don't trust Jed right now, which is always so funny to see. Just he's just based on the trades he made last year, early returns, if you want to still call them early returns a year later, a lot of those guys are doing really well in the minor league system. So even if they're not getting top 100 prospects, which like you said is not often the case anymore, I'm curious to see who they pick, why they pick them, or who they get back, why they wanted them in return, and just kind of where they can develop and where they can fit in the system and develop. Some of these PCA obviously is the #1 guy we're going to look at because he's had the biggest rise so far of anyone.
Yep.
Based off what you were saying, I think I've said that a few times on the show, is that I think Cubs fans need to prepare themselves again to not get up to be let down by the lack of name recognition there, right? Everyone, not only were people pissed when Bryant, Rizzo, and Baez were gone because of who they were, but also because outside of the Kimbrel trade, no one knew any of those prospects were. And like Ryan said, the early returns, they look like there's some upside there. There's some hope, right?
Yep.
So I'm not surprised you're telling me that, it would be similar to a Darvish trade. I think they would have to have years of control left, like in Ian Happ, for example. I'm someone who thinks that they should hold on to Happ, but if they can get, a guy who's ready, if someone's that desperate for an outfielder with one of the best OPSs in the National League, like, if you can get a guy who could play next year, then I would understand it. But I just don't know given the stage of how, like what Bryan said, how trades in baseball are being made these days, because so many teams just don't want to pay anyone.
Right, and that's a fine line to walk for another team too on trading them back. That'd be like asking the Cubs if they were ready to compete right now for a playoff spot. Okay, you can have Ian Happ, or you can trade us your Brennan Davis. Well, why wouldn't they just call up Brennan Davis, the much cheaper version who they already have in their system, and give him a shot in the postseason? I mean, you'd have to really think that prospect wasn't really what everybody else thought. Yeah. I don't know.
We got Rich Biesterfield. I should have
Rich,
remembered the name, but he said he's the one that shot photos of Braylon Marquez throwing back on June 4th. He was throwing off on flat ground, but more than soft toss. Haven't seen him since, but I also haven't seen much of the rehab group recently. I knew the name. Like, I don't know why.
Shout out to
Rich.
Rich.
The name.
Follow Rich on Twitter.
He's
great.
He's down in AZ, getting a lot of these
rehab
guys and spring training and stuff.
Takes great photos.
ACL
too.
So go follow Rich Biesterfield on Twitter. Let me see if I can find it real quick.
What can you tell us about?
Throw your Twitter handle in here, Rich. Everyone can go follow you.
Yes, please. Brendan and Corey were raving about wanting to see Matt Mervis. What can you tell us about him? Do you think he will show up here? And what would we expect from him?
Yeah, Matt Mervis leads all professional baseball hitters, major league and minor league in RBIs right now. He got to the 80 RBI mark with a double, yesterday. But he's a first baseman that was undrafted in 2020, struggled last year in low A, and then came in this year and has just been hitting from the jump. He's a guy that I think I ranked somewhere in the teens when I did the prospect list last week. I do not think we're going to see him this year, and the biggest reason that I don't think we're going to see him is he is not Rule 5 eligible this winter, and so he does not need to be added to the 40-man roster. I think the Cubs anticipate they're going to have a little bit of a crunch, and they don't want to lose prospects. That's going to be bad publicity on top of if you're bad and losing prospects. That's not good.
That's also one of the things like people don't think about is like how these roster decisions have to be made. It's like Caleb Killian had to be added to the 40-man roster this year, regardless if they thought he was ready, because he's Rule 5 eligible.
Exactly.
Matt Mervis is not, so they don't have to if they feel like they want to get a look at someone else that is, right? Like,
I think
crazy.
I think Mervis moving to AAA makes a lot of sense, and then if the Cubs were going to look at someone, it would be someone like Jared Young, who's in AAA, who's not doing as good as Mervis, but is an interesting player. The Cubs would take a look at him and say, hey, is he worth keeping around? Or does Mervis take Young's 40-man spot in next spring, next summer?
Mm-hmm. Any other final questions, Cody? One last question?
Not as far. Okay. We've had a few more, but we've already answered them on here. So, and I didn't bring them up.
Yeah, that's all right. So, basically, the headline of today is that 9 of the 10 first draft picks for the Cubs, all pitchers, clearly a focus on pitching. We've got the trade deadline coming to add to that prospect list. We're going to start to talk a lot more about prospects the second half of the season, certainly a lot in the offseason. We'll be talking about these prospects and keeping an eye on them. Big thanks to Bryan Smith, Bleacher Nation, at Cub Prospects.
One more. We did on the last show. And I know there's going to be a lot of guys called up after the deadline, but who's last time you said it was Brandon Hughes. Who's the next one that we're not expecting, or like a name that we're not expecting that we should see?
The next Morel, the next Hughes.
Yeah. Like the next one that could come up and open some eyes, I guess.
Okay, I'm going to say Cam Sanders, who is in AAA. He's a starting pitcher, has struggled a little bit. I think the ERA is mid-4s to low 5s, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
His dad was a relief pitcher, Scott Sanders, for the Cubs. I think that he is going to come up because he is Rule 5 eligible, and he's a guy that can throw it up to 99. I think they're going to give him a look in that Keegan Thompson bullpen role, see what it looks like. And he could be the kind of guy where I could imagine his debut comes, he hits like 100 out of the bullpen, and people are like, how the hell was this guy not a top 10 prospect? Like, what are you doing? And that's sort of what Christopher Morel was. So Sanders is like 2021, I think, on my list. But I think he is a guy that, if he goes to that middle relief role, could really look good.
I love to hear that because that's a guy that I haven't followed him as close as you, but I've seen some highlights on the Bird app, and like the fact that he just throws that hard it's kind of refreshing because we haven't had a lot of those. Right. I know we've seen some come up this year, but like in recent years, we're talking about not like that velocity is really missed. So it's exciting to have someone like that.
And Chicago would love Cam. I mean, the way, Christopher Morel has it with his energy, Cam has it with his swag. There is no pitcher in the Cubs system with as much swag as Cam Sanders. He gets a strikeout and he's strutting around. And
I've seen a few videos of him doing
so
that.
He's the Cody Delmendo of the Cubs farm system.
He's got vibes. All right.
He's got vibes. He's got the pink Nikes going. We're looking forward to it. Bryan, again, huge thanks. Follow him on Twitter at Cub Prospects. It's been fun. Come back and do this again in a couple months. Follow back up maybe after the trade deadline. All-Star break information. We will have All-Star game pre- and post-game coming up on Tuesday. Thursday, we will go back over all of our preseason picks. So you want to watch for that. And then Friday, back to Cubs baseball as the push to 63 and the trade deadline continues. Thanks for checking out the CHGO Cubs podcast presented by PointsBet. Use that promo code CHGO when you sign up to get 2 risk-free bets up to $2,000. Have a great night and fly the W.